I'm Felicity Cobbing, and I'm the Chief Executive and Curator of the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Alex Ariotti about her excavations at the spectacular fortress site of Tawabin, which overlooks the Dead Sea in Jordan. Alex is an archaeologist and independent researcher who has worked on field projects all over the world, including at the marquee Alona Excavations in Cyprus, Wyndham Vale in Melbourne, Australia, and the Zawara Horus Safi excavations in Jordan. Her own survey and excavation project at the fortified hilltop site of Tawabin in Jordan has been supported by the PEF for a number of years with field research grants. Hi, Alex, it's lovely to see you. And thank you for talking to me today about your work in Jordan. So can you tell me first, how did you come to learn about the site of Tawabin, and what was it about it that made you want to investigate further?
First of all, Felicity, good morning, and thank you for your kind introduction. And thank you too to the PEF for this opportunity to discuss my work at Tawabin. So I first became interested in this site really from the time I first came to work in Jordan in the early 2000s for my PhD research, where I was excavating some late Roman Byzantine fortifications in an area called Baleda on the southeastern side of the Dead Sea in the Jordan Valley, about 50 kilometers to the north of Tawabin. It was while working at Baleda that I first heard about the site, and then subsequently visited the site. And I heard about the site from some of the local workers who had told me about a large Roman fortress overlooking the town of Safi, which apparently nobody had ever excavated. It was also around this time that I first met Dr. Konstantinos Pilides, otherwise known as Dino, who is the director of the Goral Safi project, which I later became involved with from 2013 onwards, and which then led me to return regularly to work in this particular region known as the Southern Gauls. With Dino, I was excavating a Byzantine early Islamic settlement site, Khurbat Sheikh Isa, on the outskirts of Safi. And I started to become more interested in the site, which I could see clearly every day from where we worked because of its location on top of a mountain overlooking Agdig. I'd also began to read what I could about the site, which was really not a lot. There wasn't much published, no more than a brief description in a handful of survey reports of the wider locality. And this I found is quite surprising, given its vast size, its elevated position overlooking the Wadi Araba, its massive fortification, and its numerous and varied archaeological remains.
Wow, it sounds incredible. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes the site so impressive for you?
Well, aside from the breathtaking views across the Wadi Araba, as the southern Jordan Valley is called, the southern end of the Dead Sea, and the Wadi Hassa below, not to mention the stunning landscape, for me, the most impressive aspect of Tawabin would be its monumental fortification, which has been likened to that of Masada. The site is fortified almost entirely by a 2.5 kilometer long wall that encircles a citadel to the north with the remains of a badly preserved fort, while below the citadel to the south and west are 3 collapsed stone buildings, over 100 unusual circular stone enclosures, some scattered wall lines, a dam, a road, and a quarry that is spread out over a wide area, about 880 by 450 meters in size. Here, pottery sherds on the ground are scarce, but they've been dated by past surveys from the Bronze and Iron Ages right through to the medieval Islamic period, but with quite a lot of late Hellenistic, early Roman pottery scattered across the site's citadel. And all of this together indicates an occupation spanning a long period of time. Now, for me, Tawabin warranted proper investigating, and to this end, Dino encouraged me to apply for the first of my PEF grants in 2014 to map and record the site, and then again in 2016 and 17 to carry out some excavations to better understand how old the site was, who built it, and for what purpose. Issues which had been a matter of some debate since the site's discovery in the late 19th century.
Okay, well that sounds so incredible. Can you tell us a little bit more about these early investigations of the site prior to your own? What had they discovered? You know, what was their impression?
Well, Tawabin was discovered quite by chance during the first proper geological survey of the Wadi Araba, commissioned by the PEF in 1883-84, when expedition member Henry Hart came across the site chasing some ibex along the southern bank of the Wadi Hassa. Hart and his team, which was led by Edward Hull, explored these ruins, documenting the stone circles on the site's west side that they thought formed the camping ground of an army, as well as an ancient temple and the fort on the citadel, among other features. Hart was initially of the opinion that the site was likely ancient Gomorrah, but after much discussion, the expedition named the site Khobet Le Bruche, calling it an ancient site subsequently used by the Arabs as a camping ground. The site was visited again in 1924 by an expedition led by W.F. Albright, which described Tawabin as a fortified place to protect the caravan road dating to the Arab period. Now, it wasn't until a century later, until the early 1980s, that Tawabin was rediscovered by David McCreary, who was the director of the American Center of Oriental Research in Amman. And he had visited the site during his survey of the Southern Gauls. McCreary had heard the name Tawabin from the locals, which in Arabic translates as mother of bread ovens, and McCreary named the site accordingly, a name by which the site has since been known. McCreary and other subsequent visitors to Tawabin have taken the view that the site's a large military fortress of Nabatean, Roman, and even Hasmonean origin, and the stone circles forming the camping ground of an army.
Okay, well that's really, really interesting. It seems to be a site that has kind of wavered in people's consciousnesses over the years since the late 19th century onwards. Can you tell me a little bit about what you specifically were hoping to achieve through your fieldwork?
Well, as we've seen, Felicity, Tawabin had only ever received limited archaeological attention, giving rise to numerous and sometimes contradictory interpretation of the site or parts thereof from the time of its discovery until recently. And as such, in my mind, many questions remain concerning the extent, the function or multiple functions, and the dating of the site, which I sought to address through my fieldwork. My first step was to survey the site in 2015 with Jordanian surveyor Kateba Dasuki, which produced a detailed site plan making clear its visible architectural remains, while also identifying some features previously undocumented, and a study of some of the surface pottery by myself and ceramic specialist Anthony Gray indicated a sequence of occupation dating from the late 2nd century BC, early 1st century BC to the 6th century AD in one area of the site, the citadel, where there was a lot of sherds. Elsewhere, there wasn't much surface pottery that could help date the other buildings and features, including the stone circles. Therefore, in order to better understand Tawabin, further investigation had to entail selective excavation around different parts of the site to obtain securely datable pottery, coins, and other finds, and to compare masonry and construction techniques where possible. I subsequently undertook 2 fieldwork seasons in 2017 and 18 with a small team of local workers from Safi, a few of whom were the relatives of some of the guys I'd worked with in Baleda back in the early 2000s. I'd also worked alongside most of my Tawabin team when I was digging Khobet Sheikh Issa with Dino, and so had developed a real rapport with a few of them. Now, in 2017, my small team of local workers was joined by 3 Cretan friends, one of whom had digging experience, Vivos, the other, Nikos, was a photographer, and the third, Adonis, came along for logistical and moral support. The next year, I asked an Australian friend, Dom, who, despite his lack of fieldwork experience in Arabic, proved to be a real asset to the team because of his enthusiasm and his hard graft, and who became firm friends with the guys I was working with. Having a good, solid, tight-knit team of workers is absolutely critical for digging a site like Tawabin, which presented some real logistical and physical challenges. The first of which was the issue of accessibility. It was a good 45-minute plus hike up to the site, often along a narrow and steep goat path, carrying all of the necessary heavy equipment and supplies. The site too has long attracted looters who, during the duration of both fieldwork seasons, would often dig up our excavations overnight and steal or attempt to steal our equipment, which we'd hidden pretty well. And so I increasingly saw our excavations as a salvage operation to cover or to gather as much information as possible on the site before its archaeological record was destroyed altogether.
Can you tell us about how you planned your excavation, how you went about excavating such a large site, and some of the discoveries that you made?
Sure. Well, excavations began at the fort on the Citadel, which has been heavily damaged due to earthquakes, to long-term exposure to the natural elements, to the possible robbing and reusing of building materials, and to illegal looting over the long term, over decades. But to me, the Citadel is the most predominant area of Umm Tawabin, and that's because of its strategic vantage point overlooking the ancient oasis city of Zawara, which is today's Safi, as well as views across the Wadi Araba and the highlands behind, and also because of a considerable quantity of pottery strewn over the surface alongside a few visible wall lines of the fort. In deciding to first excavate the fort, which measures 35 by 45 meters in size, I wanted to expose some of the building's architecture and foundations and to recover well-stratified pottery and other finds that could help date the fort. Accordingly, over 2 field seasons, we dug through deposits to a depth of about 3.5 meters from the uneven ground surface down to the floor of a 2.5 meter deep water reservoir and to the top of the walls of a larger underground cistern, which had first been exposed by looters and which extended well beyond the limits of the excavation area and its total depth unknown. So our excavations laid bare some of the fort's walls and its 2 water storage facilities, and also yielded a variety of pottery dating from the late 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD, as well as some pottery of a later date, over 30 coins, some beads, a few metal fragments, including a belt buckle, a whistle made from a shell, a piece of colored fresco, a stone catapult missile, and part of an inscribed Nabatean incense burner. Elsewhere at Tawabin, we excavated 3 of the stone circles to collect archaeobotanical remains, including charcoal, that might substantiate how and when they were used. These stone circles are all built with dry-laid field stones, are about 3.5 by 4.5 meters in size on average, stand between 3 to 4 courses high, and each with narrow openings facing east. Now, our excavations showed that in each case, the line of stones forming a circle formation on the ground didn't extend below the surface, and nor did the circles contain any interior features, although one was found to have been built directly on top of 2 walls belonging to an altogether different structure dating to an earlier period. Next up were the two buildings on the west and south sides of the site, also below the citadel. The first being Fort B, which measures 33 by 23 meters in size and resembles a large mound of rubble stone, but with a few visible internal walls, including a tower, which was most likely the ancient temple first documented by the PEF over a century ago. We dug a small probe in an area relatively free of rubble stone that ultimately didn't produce any material that could help date this structure, and in fact led us to believe that this area was the probable location of a post-occupational burial. Close by, Fort C, slightly larger, about 44 by 48 meters in size, also resembles a large pile of rubble stone, but with a few visible internal walls of large dressed ashlar blocks like Fort B, and a few looted burials inside. Our excavations yielded evidence of modern human activity like plastic, plus a few fragments of human bone, but no pottery, suggesting that this area was another location of a looted burial. Lastly, we dug some probes across sections of Tawabin's fortification wall that runs largely intact and uninterrupted over the predominantly steep terrain. Excavation revealed it to be a casemate. By that I mean two parallel walls of large boulders, 4 to 4.5 meters wide, and with a 2-meter wide trench separating the two walls. Felicity, it was a lot of digging over a fairly short period of time. In total, we dug 11 probes around the site, sieving the soil where possible and recording everything we uncovered by written description, photography, and illustration over 2 fieldwork seasons. Now, since then, we've been studying all of the material recovered by excavation, including the pottery, the coins, and the botanical remains. The early findings of these studies have enabled us to draw some important conclusions about the dating of Tawabin, as well as its status as a clearly significant defensive hilltop site, which may have served multiple functions over a long period of time, which you can hear about in more detail in PEF Exploration Part 2.